How important do you believe the American right to bear arms and maintain militias? Is it equivalent to the right to free speech? Well, I don't think anything is equivalent to the right to free speech or the responsibility for free speech. How important do I believe that right is? Jesus, that's a tough question. You know, my dad's a hunter. He has 200 rifles, something like that. They're all single shots because he believes in aiming carefully. The culture I come from, which is northwestern Canada, is a rural culture, a hunting culture. People take their guns seriously there, and it is definitely part of their lifestyle. I mean, my dad's hunted his whole life, and we ate wild meat almost all the time I was growing up. I think that the right to bear arms is one of the markers of a free society. I don't think it's reasonable that only the police and the army should be allowed to be dangerous. Having said that, well, I think I'll just leave it at that. I mean, I feel obligated in some sense to go farther, especially with regards to what happened in Las Vegas, but it seems to me that mostly what happens after these mass shootings is that the event gets absolutely politicized and people take their standard positions and there's no moving either side, and that's too bad. I think that it's unfortunate to use an event like the Las Vegas event or the Columbine shootings to make political capital, and I think that's usually what happens, and so I'm not going to do that. I think it's an important right. I believe that the individual should be allowed or even encouraged to be dangerous, but controlled, you know. So along with that right is a responsibility, and I guess maybe from the NRA there should be more discussion of responsibility. Is that possible? Variety might be preferable to being ignored, and so, you know, there's a lot of talk about gun control, and that's understandable, especially with regards to automatic rifles. Although I also understand why the people who are gun owners are afraid of allowing what they regard as one of their fundamental rights to be infringed upon. But it would certainly be useful if we stopped giving people who do this sort of thing $100 million worth of free publicity and all the notoriety they can manage. So, you know, that's another way of thinking about controlling. How important do you believe the American right to bear arms and maintain militias? Is it equivalent to the right to free speech? Well, I don't think anything is equivalent to the right to free speech or the responsibility for free speech. How important do I believe that right is? Jesus, that's a tough question. You know, my dad's a hunter. He has 200 rifles, something like that. They're all single shots because he believes in aiming carefully. The culture I come from, which is northwestern Canada, is a rural culture, a hunting culture. People take their guns seriously there, and it is definitely part of their lifestyle. I mean, my dad's hunted his whole life, and we ate wild meat almost all the time I was growing up. I think that the right to bear arms is one of the markers of a free society. I don't think it's reasonable that only the police and the army should be allowed to be dangerous. Having said that, well, I think I'll just leave it at that. I mean, I feel obligated in some sense to go farther, especially with regards to what happened in Las Vegas, but it seems to me that mostly what happens after these mass shootings is that the event gets absolutely politicized and people take their standard positions and there's no moving either side, and that's too bad. But I think that it's unfortunate to use an event like the Las Vegas event or the Columbine shootings to make political capital, and I think that's usually what happens, and so I'm not going to do that. I think it's an important right. I believe that the individual should be allowed or even encouraged to be dangerous, but controlled, you know. So along with that right is a responsibility, and I guess maybe from the, you can share your thoughts on the Vegas shooting. Yeah. Well, what I would do is recommend the biblical lecture I did on Cain and Abel, I would say, because I think that that's a good summary of the state of mind that somebody has to be in order to do what was done at Las Vegas. So you have to be very, very embittered by life in order to do that sort of thing, and you have to be searching for revenge, I would say. And it's not, you know, you might think, well, it's only revenge on other people because you've developed hatred for people, but it's deeper than that. It's not just hatred for people. I would say it's hatred for being itself, and the desire to take revenge on being for the outrage of the tragedy and suffering that's associated with being. And maybe the tragedy and suffering that's been part and parcel of your own life. And that makes you embittered, and then past embittered becomes outraged, and past outraged becomes, well, homicidal or even genocidal. And that's a terrible state of mind to be in. It's a hellish state. I believe that the best way to conceptualize the state of mind that someone has to be in order to do something like the Columbine shootings, for example, or what happened in Las Vegas, is that you're really, and you have to speak about it in religious languages, you're really out for revenge against God for the outrage of creation. That's what it looks like to me. And that's a state of mind that's truly hellish. And you can get there by brooding long enough. Now, it's also possible, I mean, this guy didn't have any previous history, criminal history or anything like that. And he's pretty old. So, you know, there's also the possibility of some kind of neurological pathology that might be characteristic of him. You know, some degenerative neurological disease. There was a kid years ago at the University of Texas at Austin who climbed up on the tower there and shot a number of people with a high-powered rifle, and he had a fast-growing tumor on his hypothalamus and had reported like these being overcome with extreme feelings of rage. And so that's another possibility. But I would say the embitterment hypothesis is the strongest one. I would also say too, I noticed that Steven Pinker tweeted this today, is that one of the ways of controlling this sort of thing would be for the press to agree, not for there to be a blanket agreement, not to publicize the name or any other identity markers of the people who do the shooting. Because there's also this really, what would you call it, arrogance. It's a kind of arrogance and pride, last-ditch arrogance and pride that is associated with the fantasies that drive this sort of behavior. And the fantasy is something like, well, after I do this, everyone will sure know who the hell I was, you know, even though maybe I was ignored or unhappy when I was alive. After I'm dead, everybody's going to know who I was and what I did. And, you know, so there's this underground desire for fame. I guess it's notoriety, but notoriety might be preferable to being ignored. And so, you know, there's a lot of talk about gun control, and that's understandable, especially with regards to automatic rifles. Although I also understand why the people who are gun owners are afraid of allowing what they regard as one of their fundamental rights to be infringed upon. But it would certainly be useful if we stop giving people who do this sort of thing $100 million worth of free publicity and all the notoriety they can manage. So, you know, that's another way of thinking about controlling it. So
one of the things you'll see, if you're interested in this sort of thing, if you ever go read the writings of the Columbine killers, the teens, they're very interesting. They're very much worth reading, especially, I think it's Dylan Klebold, who was the more literate of the two. But he tells you exactly where he went after brooding and brooding and brooding on his isolation and segregation from mankind. So he's out there he's out there in a chaotic domain. And because he's tortured by that, his thoughts take an unbelievably dark turn. Like, it's unimaginably dark. If you're interested in that sort of thing, you could read that. There's another book you could read called Panzram, Panzram, and it's a fascinating book. It's about this guy who, I think he raped 1,200 men. So that sort of tells you what sort of guy he was. Extraordinarily physically powerful and brutal and malevolent. And he was kind of a juvenile delinquent type. And they put him in a reform school, and he was not well treated in that reform school. It's sort of like the worst of the Canadian residential schools. And when he came out, he was not a happy boy. And so he spent the rest of his life trying to be as destructive as he could possibly imagine, and purely, consciously, with malevolent intent. And then, and believe me, he was pretty destructive. He kept track of the dollar value of all the buildings he burned down. He tried to start a war between Britain and the United States. Like, he was all out for all-out mayhem. His dying words that they're going to hang him, he told the guy who was going to hang him, he said, "Hurry up, you Hoosier bastard. I could kill 12 men in the time it takes you to hang me." And that's exactly the sort of person he was. And he made friends with this physician, in the prison, who he thought was like the first person who ever did something nice for him, gave him $1 for cigarettes, if I remember correctly, and the physician encouraged him to write his autobiography. And so he did, and it's available. And so if you want a view, because you always think of people, you think, well, people have good intentions, that you especially think that if you're naive and agreeable. So all of you who are sitting there out there thinking people have good intentions, you're probably high in agreeableness. But that's not always the case. People can have very dark motivations that are fully conscious and very well elaborated. And Panzram he was smart. And his book is very well written, and he tells you exactly why he thought the way he thought. And so it's a good glimpse of exactly this sort of thing, where you can get to, if you want to, by brooding on your specific misfortune. And his basic credo was that human beings were so reprehensible that they should just be eliminated. And believe me, that's what he was trying to do. And these people who do terrible things, like the Columbine shooters, that's exactly what, for lack of a better word, they're possessed by. It's sheer malevolence. And the Columbine kids had a much more spectacular catastrophe plan than the one that actually occurred. And they knew it was going to be a full-blown media circus. And lots of these people who engage in those sorts of mass murders, they know about the other mass murderers, and they're engaged in a competition. And the competition is who can do the most brutal thing the fastest, something like that. So you can't just be thinking about people who have good intentions but have somehow gone wrong. If you ever meet someone who isn't like that and you think that, you're just a tree with ripe fruit to be plucked.
Student in STEM, and I feel bombarded by all the feminist groups trying to infantilize me. How do I prevent them from turning me into an adult child? One of the things that's really useful to do in university is to pick your peer group. When I went to university, I made new friends in university, and that was really useful. So I had my personal friends, and they were people who were trying to aim at something better than what they had, something better than what they had left. And that was a real relief to me. I wrote about that in my new book too, called Make Friends with People Who Want the Best for You. That's Rule 3. But I also realized that when you went to university, you picked your peers. And in the STEM fields, what you should do is pick some great scientists. And those could be people that you just read books about. Pick some great scientists, man, or some great engineers, or some great mathematicians, because I don't know where you are in the STEM fields. Pick a hero or two or three, and then make those your peers, right? And don't pay any attention to all the noise and ruckus that you hear around you. It's all nonsense anyways. Partly what should happen when you go to university is that you should be introduced to great people. And those can be great people of the past. Their spirits still live on in their work and their books. And you can pick them as peers and just ignore all that idiot political nonsense while you straighten yourself out and learn to be great at what you do. Develop a philosophy of greatness, and that will keep the social justice warriors at bay.
So let me ask you something. How do you feel about guns right now at this point in your life with a family and what's going on in your life? How do you feel about guns?
This is the real problem with guns. The same problem with everything else. People are fucking stupid. There are a bunch of people that are fucking stupid. Now, if you had to ask me, do I think that everybody in this room, do I think that they are responsible enough to handle a firearm and own a firearm? Yes, absolutely. Everybody in this room is. I believe so. But is it everybody in the world? Fuck no. But who can decide? Well, that's the point of the whole law. The whole point of the law is you can't let some tyrannical dictator decide who can and can't be armed. Because at the end of the day, what we really have to worry about as much as crime is you have to worry about the government turning into crime. Because the governments of nations all over the world have fucked the people over and done shit that people don't want, imprisoned them, enslaved them. Are we supposed to ignore that? Are we supposed to pretend we're past that? We're past that completely. People will never be like that again. An armed militia is in the possibility that it all goes wrong. That's what it's for. It's not for when everything's going right. It's for when it all goes wrong. To deny the possibility that it could all go wrong, to me, you're lying. You're lying. You're pretending we're better than we are. Because you look all over the world, there's war everywhere. There's war everywhere in the world. There's murder everywhere in the world. There's robbery and thievery everywhere in the world. There's not equal. It's not equal with the amount of chances people have. It's not equal the amount of the time you do in jail if you get caught for things. There's all sorts of inequalities and all sorts of real fucking problems in the world. And to say that we've reached some utopian place where you don't have to worry about the government turning into a tyranny, bullshit. No, I don't think the government right now is a tyranny. I don't think they're controlling us. I don't think they're doing anything unbelievably oppressive. I think they respond to, in a certain extent, to the amount of pressure that people put on them. And when people say things like that, we don't want to go into Syria. Remember that Syria thing? Or Obama was on TV. We're like, fuck this. No one wants to go to Syria. They're like, he's back on the Syria. He's back on the Syria. At the end of the day, people that are used to going to war like to go to war. They make a lot of fucking money doing it. And you have to be aware of that kind of shit. You got to be aware of people trying to force you into things. You got to think about Kent State. Man, that was in our lifetime. You know? During the Vietnam War, they fucking shot kids that were protesting. They shot them on their college campus for doing nothing but protesting. That wasn't that long ago, man. It's not that long ago. I'm not advocating that there should be some fucking uprising and people should pull guns. But I am saying you can't just have one group of people running other groups of people with no recourse. With no the people don't have any ability to stop them. So the people in power, we just have to trust that they're going to be good. That's crazy. Why would you do that? They're just people. And people, if you give them too much power, they almost always fuck it. They almost always abuse the shit out of it. It's very rare that someone gets into a position of power and all of a sudden does wonderful, selfless things for the world. Bullshit. They do weird things. They have weird fucking people that get paid off. They have subsidies for like oil and corn and greasy dealings with private prisons. Like, there's a lot of fucking weird shit going on in power. So to say that we're just, everything's going to be fine, we don't need guns. In England, we don't have guns and we're fine. You still have a queen. You're still in some weird fucking quasi-imperial state.
The scariest thing, though, is like if you go on Facebook and you scroll through, there's video after video of people fight. Like, that's the biggest thing now is World Star and just people fighting.
Yeah, well, that's
it scares me for all these people to have guns. Like,
that's true, too.
It's to be honest, like with all the road rage happening, like that guy a few months ago got pulled out of his car on like Hollywood Boulevard or something.
I don't want a fucking gun to be on the offensive. I don't want a gun to be on the offensive.
Right.
I want a gun in case last night him and I were talking shit till 12:30 at night on my side street. A guy kept circling. God, after half hour, a cop came by because somebody actually called the cops and said there's two guys standing out there. Just bullshit.
Look at you criminal-looking motherfucker.
No, we're out there just telling stories after the comedy store.
Yeah, I know what it is. Yeah.
And for a minute there, when that white car came around the second time, I thought I needed a gun. I don't know what people are thinking no more. You don't know what people are thinking.
You could zig when you could have zagged, and you could run into someone who's out of their fucking mind.
Out of their fucking minds, and you never know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an advocate of being armed all the time. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, you can't let the government tell you whether or not you can have a weapon. It's just not, doesn't make sense.
Well, for years I had the felony. I still have the felonies. And the government tells me I can't have a pistol. Now, my crime was with a pistol. All right, did it go off? No, but there was a potential for violence. There's always a potential for violence. In my heart and in my mind, I did a probationary period already. That was 1987. I did a probationary period again. More than the probationary period. I feel in my heart right now, I'm capable of carrying a gun as much as I hate it. I fucking hate those things because I know what they bring. You know what I'm saying? I know what they bring to some people. They're not going to bring it to me because I'm not young and stupid anymore. Do you understand me? I really wanted to protect my daughter. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to. There's weird people doing, every time you watch the news, every time I watch the news and I see something stupid, what happened in Houston yesterday? You see that yesterday?
No. What happened?
Fucking soldier snapped.
No.
4 fucking tours in Afghanistan, and he got some fucking machine gun. He shot somebody at the gas station. There were so many fucking bullets that the gas station blew up in a suburb in Houston. The cops were in this. You got to see the cop cars. It was like heat. Remember those cars with the windshields and shit?
So did he get in a road rage with somebody?
No. He just went into a gas station, shot a customer, and from there the party started. Walked down the street shooting, 1 dead, 6 injured. Shot up 30 fucking cars in the middle of the street. I'm walking to a movie with my daughter. I'm minding my business. Lee, instead of fucking driving, let's walk to the taco place today.
Right.
That could happen. I know this going in. When I leave my house every morning, I know this is possible.
And that's the messed up part, because he has a gun. He has the right to have a gun. But if someone else in Houston had a gun, maybe they could have shot him.
2 dead, 6 injured, randomly, just at whoever. You need that in your life? Now, I'm not a sharpshooter, but I could shoot him in the fucking leg. I believe in shooting him in the leg if I have a great cover.
Yeah.
I'm not looking to shoot the fucking guy like the cops are going to. I mean, you should have heard the tapes.
It's crazy.
Ta, 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 ta,
and that's Texas, too, where everybody's armed. But, many people are not trained. That's also a big part of the problem with firearms.
Listen, brother, let me tell you something. You have no idea what happens to your body when you hear a gunshot 10 feet from you.
Oh, yeah.
You have no idea. You don't know. I don't give a fuck what that. Whoa, I fought Chuck Liddell. I know. I know he knocked the fuck out of you, but you've never heard a gunshot go off.
Right.
Much less a machine gun.
You got to see people's faces.
Right, much less a machine gun.
You have to see people's faces. And you hear that clip for real. It ain't a movie. This ain't no Dolph Lundgren movie. Or what's the other guy that played the mechanic? It ain't one of these movies. This is
Jason
real,
Statham?
And it just shoots you. It just kills you.
Yeah.
That's why people freeze.
Yeah.
You freeze, you go into shock. People that are not used to that, they play bingo and they take their family for ice cream, they don't need that shit.
Yeah.
I'm petrified. I live in fear as a...
Okay, well, everything you just heard was recorded before the Orlando attack, which, as you certainly know, is the worst mass shooting in American history. And I just have a few things to add, because our response to this attack thus far has only increased my concerns about our political process and about the upcoming election. Because as bad as Trump has been, he just gave his big speech yesterday. I'm recording this on Tuesday, and it was terrible, right? I mean, just if you imagine him being our president, it was a terrible speech. And yet, he was better than Clinton or than the president in his response to Orlando. And that is terrifying. The president gave a speech without ever mentioning Islamism, jihadism, Islamic terrorism, radical Islam. He gave a speech that only focused on the availability of guns and the necessity of reforming our gun laws. And Clinton sent an email to her followers where, again, there was no mention of the actual belief system, the ideology that is producing this kind of violence. She talked about guns, and then she immediately pivoted into a concern about Islamophobia and about demonizing Muslims. This has been the most common response from liberals. I mean, the most balance you get has been something like, Fareed Zakaria sent a tweet saying, this can be both about radical Islam and guns. Doesn't have to be one or the other, this problem. Well, it does have to be one or the other if everyone is using the gun issue to obfuscate the core issue, which is jihadism. Now, I am in favor of gun reform. I think our gun laws should change. I think it should be difficult to get a gun license. I think it should require training, right? I've said that this is analogous to getting a pilot's license in my mind. You shouldn't be able just to walk into a store and buy a gun without any knowledge about how to use it or to store it safely, and without a background check that will find your history of crime and mental illness, and the fact that in this case, you had been interviewed 3 times by the FBI as a suspected terrorist. So the fact that this guy was able to get guns is astonishing, right? And there's no argument for that kind of loophole in our vetting process. Even right-wing Second Amendment fanatics should be able to get on the side of those of us who want to keep guns out of the hands of aspiring jihadists, right? You can't be afraid of sleeper cells of terrorists in this country and turn up that paranoia to 11 and also want completely frictionless access to the most powerful weaponry. That doesn't make any sense. So why not start erring on the side of sensible vetting for firearm purchases? But apart from that concern, apart from getting our databases to cohere, right, and properly vetting gun purchases, here is why gun control has no relevance to this particular act of terrorism. And you should be able to see this very simply. Okay? It has no relevance because there is absolutely no reason to believe that he couldn't have killed the same number of people with a few handguns. He had a handgun and an AR-15 rifle. Those who are fixated on the rifle as a, quote, assault weapon don't understand the conditions under which a rifle of that kind offers a shooter a real advantage. I mean, it seems strange to spell this out in this context, but a rifle offers you an advantage at distance, at distances of 20 yards, 30 yards, 50 yards. That's when you're much more likely to hit what you're aiming at with a rifle than with a handgun. Yes, perhaps in his final shootout with the cops, his rifle did offer some real advantage. But in terms of killing 50 people on a dance floor where you don't even have to aim because all you have is a wall of bodies in front of you at point-blank range, a handgun is arguably better than a rifle because it's much harder for anyone to grab it away from you. And it's the best possible weapon when you think about bringing the gun into the club in the first place. So handguns are just as dangerous in most of these conditions under which there have been mass shootings, in movie theaters, at point-blank range, when you're talking about executing hostages, and certainly when you're talking about a packed club. So that's why everyone who's talking about the AR-15 is just advertising their ignorance. But even more important, and this reveals all of this talk about guns in the aftermath of an event like this to be just empty political preening, because no one, literally no one, on our political landscape, and this includes Michael Bloomberg and Kathy Giffords and every prominent gun reform advocate, no one has a plan to stop the sale of handguns. And unless you have that, unless you're going to repeal the Second Amendment, you are doing nothing to stop this sort of atrocity. And I know it sounds insane if you don't live in the U.S., if you live in Australia or Western Europe or Japan. I know that the fact that we can't get rid of guns, the fact that we can't even aspire to get rid of guns in our society is just crazy to you. And I know many of you find my views about guns, which are somewhat difficult to summarize, fairly flabbergasting. But the issue is none of these people, including Hillary Clinton, who are focusing on guns in the aftermath of this atrocity rather than on jihadism, which is the reason for this atrocity, none of them are talking about or even thinking about taking handguns away from Americans who can buy them legally. So apart from the database issue, which I fully agree we have to sort out, all of this talk about guns is a combination of pure confusion on the part of people who don't know anything about guns and dishonest political posturing on the part of those who do.